Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Goose Digital series here. We have a couple people with us here. We've got Kevin Butler from Goose Digital, and we got Mark Lawrence from the Angel Investors of Ontario, and we will be introducing them in a very in short manner. But today, the three of us were discussing this over a series of meetings over the past year, where it came into a lot of angel groups and venture capital groups where we're always looking at the due diligence on the actual how much revenue you're making, what your predicted revenue might be in the next quarter or the next year. But we've always been, as angel investors, typically skipping over, well, what's the DNA or what's the diligence in the sales and marketing stack? Where should individuals be in their maturity when asking angel investors for money? And again, these questions could be like an equalizer slide, which could be if you're asking for a million plus, obviously you should be in more of a mature state. And if we're just sort of getting our toes in the water and you're kind of doing friends and family, and maybe a couple of angel investors at the beginning when it's less than $250,000, that might be more of an immature stage, and you might be doing things like pilots, and you might not have had these decisions made just yet. But today is going to be a conversation again, where should you be? What should you have? What things? Again, this is not a one or a zero. This is more or less a conversation about where you should be when you're coming to the angel investors. So within the overview, as we were just talking about, we're going right into this MarTech stack. And again, why we call it MarTech as well is there is a generational sort of change right now where a lot of sales and marketing are kind of mixing together. And Kevin will be speaking to this in future slides. But let's get started here. And I'd love to hear a little bit more from the speakers today too on, their background, why they're so interested in this subject matter, and again why this excites you every single day when you wake up. And we'll start with Kevin.
Thanks, Chris. Welcome to everyone joining us today. We're thrilled to sit and talk about all things MarTech, MarTech stacks, and how they point back to marketing being a revenue growth engine for your organization. My name's Kevin Butler. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Goose Digital. I oversee all of the delivery and digital marketing execution for our clients. Today, we have 400 plus clients under Goose Digital, of which 100 or so are active at any given time in huge programs, small projects, and everything. Again, pointing back to how does marketing actually support the business's missions and objectives. Myself, I'm a career-long marketer. I've been in the tech and SaaS space for way too long, and I've seen enough to know what's good and bad, and we're looking forward to getting into it today. So thank you for joining us.
Perfect. And Mark.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Chris. Name is Mark Lawrence. I'm currently the Executive Chair of Angel Investors Ontario. I've been a volunteer director and chair with Angel Investors for over 12 years, and for the last 18 months, I've been at the operating helm as well. Just for those of you who have joined from the Angel Investors Network, thank you very much for joining us. We represent and convene 18 separate angel groups across the province. Innovation and funding doesn't stop at the GTA border. And we have 1,800 active angel investors who, over 18 years life of AIO, we've invested over 800 million directly into startups, with many multiples of that going forward. What makes it interesting for today's discussion is in the first half of my life, I used to be a buy, hold, sell analyst on technology stocks, innovation, biotech, every sector within the Canadian market, starting in 1987 when the first crash hit. That was 2 days before I started working, or 2 days after I started working. And I've looked and formulated and created forecasts for innovation companies for the last 35 to close to 40 years. I can't count, so I'm not sure what the exact number is. But it's changed over the number of years of the stage of the company as to how much money is being allocated to marketing and tracking in the past and going forward. And I think that's something I'm going to talk about is what you've done in the past is equally as important as what you're going to talk about in the future in your marketing budget. And that's information for investors. And we need to know that going forward. So turn it back to Chris.
That's perfect. And myself, I want to hear the story of 1987 at a future sort of webinar with you, Mark, and that'd be excellent to focus in on. My role at Adams Hamilton, I do a lot of advising for technology companies. I am part of the Georgian Angel Network selection group, so I do look at the criteria with our executive director, and these things that we're talking about today do come up from time to time. But again, typically we're looking at IP and we're looking at the tech and the moat in the team, in the terrain, and the why now. And sometimes we do miss out on that kind of like that. That's where's the maturity in the sales and marketing, and how is this leader going to be, or leaders going to be taking this on? And that's what I would be looking at from a daily basis. I am a mentor at DMZ and also through the Georgian College Innovation Center. And I am also on IP Ontario's IP coach team for people that are looking to do patents and trademarks. Well, let's get into it here. And I think, this is maybe where Kevin can kind of start us off here. But again, at any sense, whatever we're going to talk about today is always dedicated to a budget, and it's how much cash someone has on hand to actually do the marketing. I mean, obviously there are some free marketing, as in the leader, the co-founders can be, or the team can be building and doing things and organically kind of growing the company. Here, we're going to be talking a little bit more about when we're going a little bit deeper on here. We're going to be have to be investing in some software. We're going to have to be investing in some potentially, as simple as boosting some ads in LinkedIn to potentially boosting ads in different various locations on Google. So, Kevin, let's talk about healthy budgets from your perspective. We'll go there.
Sure. Sure. Thanks, Chris. And I think even before we get into what budget should actually be, I think the first major call out to mention is that marketing shouldn't start after you raise your first round of funding. It's really got to start from day one or as close to day one as possible. The chances of you raising capital and part of the plan to use that money to then start marketing is a lot less appealing than if you've already got some level of marketing machine already going. And I think that's going to be instrumental, if not critical, towards securing that funding, that you actually have a plan and you know what to do. And this is really gas on a well-lit fire already. So the way to look at here and the way we've broke it down is there's what mature companies do as far as like established organizations. They have a functioning department. The function of marketing itself is understood and known to some reasonable extent within the organization. And typically that makes up something like 7 to 8% of total company revenue on an annual basis. In the mature SaaS world, is kind of something like around 8%, maybe as high as 10%. These are according to whether it's Gartner's CMO surveys that span any number of industries, as well as SaaS Capital and some of their 2025 benchmarks. However, I think for a majority of the organizations represented on this call today, in terms of our guests and what the general tone of this presentation is all about, this is really about growth companies and early stage companies. And I think to that point, we have ground to make up on in our industries. We are either disruptors or we are entirely new categories that we're creating, and we need to allocate a lot more capital into marketing in the early stages to help tell that story and build awareness of who we are and what we do. At seed stage level, according to Crunchbase, we often see organizations in and around that 10 to 20% of total funding going to marketing. Of course, the difference here is we're talking about percentage of funding rather than percentage of revenue, because in some cases, the revenue is either low or you could be pre-rev and a percentage of zero is zero, right? So I think to that point, It's got to be a pretty good amount. And it may sound uncomfortable, but the reality is we have to start building our awareness somewhere. In particular, if you're building a new category, there is no known demand for your product or service. And I think we have to go out and create that. On a Series A, where you're starting to get a bit more mature, you have a bit more runway, we typically see that percentage of total funding go up to 25 to 40%. Depending on which VCs and groups that you're raising money from, they may actually advocate for larger allocation of your total funding, perhaps even up to the 30 to 50% range. But Mark, if I throw it over to you, what are you seeing in growth stage companies, whether it's at the seed or Series A level, in terms of percentage of capital going out to marketing for customer acquisition?
I would say that the people that are realistic and have a well-rounded group of people around them is probably at that 35 to 40%. Anything less than that, I start to wonder, is this simply two engineers that are still trying to create their minimum viable product? And they sort of say, well, once we get it going, then we'll start allocating some more money. So I think the guys that are getting interest from VCs are at that level. And if they've got something that's 10 or 12 or 15%, it's something then we have to have a discussion with the founder that we're not right in the ballpark for getting funded at this stage.
I hear that a lot too. This whole, well, let's get the product right, just a few more features, that minimum viable that you talked about, and then we can get into marketing. And I just don't think marketing should be waited to do. You should start to do it immediately and you can continue to build off of it. But we were talking earlier this morning, and it's never, or very rarely, is it the best product or technology in the space that makes you the market leader. It's about presence, it's about clever marketing, it's about actually understanding where the industry is going and how you connect those offerings into value propositions for your potential audience and buyers. So I think to that point, the mistake is always waiting for the next feature. It may be delayed, it may not come, the market might evolve and shift, and that feature doesn't matter anymore, and you just can't wait to market. So I love that you brought that up, Mark, because I fully agree with that. Chris, I
And
don't know
and
what you see in your funding and raises and conversations. I'd love for you to throw in some insight and context that you see.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that this brings me into my meme that I wanted to show here, which was basically around a founder always kind of moving more towards perfecting, as Mark's saying, perfecting their IP and concentrating on that. Now, let's make sure we put this in perspective as well. And I think we don't want to beat anybody up here today, but if a team is coming to the angel group knowing that they're only entering into a few pilots, looking for some extension of runway to prove out the pilots and or improve their IP and looking at development, that's at least they're acknowledging that's where the spend's going. There's an open communication with the angel group and the selection committee, understanding more than likely that they're asking for a lower amount of money because this is where they're at in their stage. And they haven't yet, potentially pinpoint or identify their audience or their MVP or exactly what their price point might look like because they're sort of entering in these letters of intent or pilots. And we can't expect market or sales and marketing maturity at that stage. However, if they are coming back for the second round, or if they're coming back after possibly doing an earlier round somewhere else, and then now they're asking for something like 500,000 to $1 million to sort of go to market, obviously there's going to be a need of understanding around, well, exactly. I think Mark's going to probably comment on this in a second here, but the question that I always have, Mark, maybe you can answer a little bit of this too, is like, hey, we're hiring this individual. And then you go, well, how much are you paying for XYZ individual? And they're going to say, well, let's say it's for the ease of math today, we'll say $100,000. Okay, well, you're allocating $100,000 to marketing. Well, yeah, so you're telling me that your marketing budget's 100 grand, but that's basically for labor. So you have basically $0 to go to a trade show or $0 to buy some Google ads or $0 to do some email marketing, whatever that might be. So maybe Mark, you want to comment on what you may have been seeing too?
Sure. I mean, I unfortunately see some good, bad, and ugly over the years. I think we all realize that sometimes we make mistakes going forward. And I think if there's an angel investor or founder who says they don't make mistake, that's probably not someone we want to help with because everybody does. I still remember when my research boss at a brokerage firm said, we can't hire him because he's been fired before. Well, everybody stood up in the room and left because no, it happens and we just have to learn by our mistakes. But I found that uh, the readiness or the transparency is really important. So I've found, the same question I asked, how much has been spent, and they said, well, it's about 1.5 million. And I see that that's 1.5 million that's being accrued on the balance sheet for unpaid salaries for the two founders. So you get some funny stuff going on there. Um, and I've seen people saying, I'd like to see your financials, and we're talking about that. And this is just not just marketing financials, but the whole financials. And they'll say, well, Mark, we're pre-revenue, so we don't have financials. Or we're an impact company, we don't have financials. So sometimes you have to read through all of that and really you have to get a sense of camaraderie with the founder that you can trust what he's saying, and he's got full support from the board and doesn't deviate from what the board has approved him to do going forward. So when we come up with third-party expenses, sometimes I've seen a guy in a company I took public, a board approved him $160,000 to do a trade show when we created the first Apple iPad before Apple iPad was informed or created. And he went and spent $500,000 at the trade show on that. And we at the board sort of scolded him and said, what do you want me to make? Put up a bunch of ping pong tables. So you have both things of someone keeping the number down to the number they want you to think you need, or they just go and do something on the side. So it really does create, it has to be a symbiotic relationship. What is the budget? How is that spent? And it's got to be monitored going forward because sometimes people play games on it.
Yeah, it does. But just to that point, maybe just to close the thought there is that you're spending to learn too. And we talk about this with a lot of companies that we work with in various stages of maturity that they're in. And not all marketing is going to work. And I think that's okay. Sometimes I think there's this internalized pressure one puts on themselves to say, well, I have to be able to validate and prove that every dollar I've spent is a good dollar spent. And I think to me, in my head, what I coach and communicate to a lot of my clients I do consulting for is you're spending to learn because part of the reason you're raising capital is to get there quicker. And you're not going to get there quicker if you don't actually know how to engage with your audience, where to engage with them, and what messages will actually resonate. And particularly with growth stage companies early on, you're in part using some of that capital to test out messaging, to understand in particular categories what's actually landing and resonating here. And that might even determine and help influence to some degree product roadmap and future feature functionality. So I think to that point, it's part of the spend here has to be around learning and getting to answers faster. And that's the advantage you have when you're raising capital versus bootstrapping.
And if I can just add there quickly, um, I think pivots are okay, and that happens all the time. As you said, if you spend $1, you've got to have a sense of what you're trying to get out of that and compare afterwards. And sometimes pivots occur, but as a founder, you shouldn't be hiding those. They should be front and center. Yes, we spent $500,000 on marketing. This was a prior product. We did the following things. We learned from it. We failed on this, and we've adjusted our product. But don't try to think you can hide 4 years of prior business from a new investor. We have to know that story.
Yep. Yep. All right. So let's get into MarTech stacks and it being your due diligence as well. And so when we jump into here, we'll probably start again with Kevin here. And I think that for me, it's as simple as do they have a spreadsheet right now, or did they actually take the time and to download, potentially HubSpot or Salesforce or Pipedrive or Monday.com or someone like that, or Zoho, and use the free sort of CRM and have some sort of maturity and some basic processes right now for their team to drive and put leads, even if it's their own referrals from the co-founders from LinkedIn. at least identifying them and putting them in here, and then quite understanding, even if it's an LOI, that leads to a pilot, and the pilot might lead to, a SaaS agreement or some custom development. Even if you don't even know the pricing yet on that SaaS agreement or pricing or custom development, at least have this sort of set up as a funnel right now, and then you can figure out how to characterize these things as you move down the street, kind of thing. But Kevin, if you could just talk a little bit about this funnel and what options companies have to to do these things at the beginning of time.
Sure. I mean, from my perspective, when we're talking about MarTech and the role that marketing now plays in growth, like there's never been a better and faster time to more rapidly achieve market awareness and engagement with your target audience. And I think to that point, AI is just increased amount of gas on said fire. I think to me, when VCs or any level of investor is looking at your organization, they want to see that you have momentum. It's not enough anymore to just have a good vision and a solid product, even pre minimum viable. I think they need to see that you've got a degree of momentum here, and that's going to really come from your tech stack. And so I think MarTech and what you're actually using to underpin your marketing is becoming increasingly important in the bigger due diligence picture. So that's kind of how we framed it out here. And really, it's going to break down into what we would define at here at Goose Digital is repositioning or reframing your marketing spend and your marketing technology as part of that into not an IT expense, but a growth driver. And what does that really mean? You're either going to have a fundable tech stack or an unfundable tech stack. So when we say fundable, what we really mean is some degree of integrated, automated processes that actually produce clean data and drive programs that can be scaled. And when we say unfundable, what we really mean is there's like either limited or no technology, Chris, like you alluded to, or even just like it's a bunch of spreadsheets and manual processes, and it's really all like connected by one individual who's kind of pulling all the strings and they're stressed out, and it represents a big risk in that it can't continue to run without that person. And so when we list here, we've got key factors. It's how does the MarTech and the technology underpinning all the marketing, how does it actually work towards creating sustainable, repeatable growth for the organization? Does it support with, collect, and even clean to some degree the level of quality data that you actually have to go and run these programs moving forward? What's the level of integration like between these systems? I think that's a really big key one too, because again, if it's just spreadsheets holding it all together or an individual running manual processes, that isn't scalable either. And this will all go into the final 2 points, which is how clear is the reporting? Can you actually show investors that you have a pretty good idea of like marketing attribution, ROI on the spend? Do you know the cost of acquisition, things like that? What's the lifetime value if you've been running for a little bit of time here? Do you even know how many additional SOWs and engagements you have off the first one if you're more of a services business? And then the last one is what does the internal usage like? Maybe you have a great stack. Maybe you actually do have good reporting and you've got dashboards that show how far you are along your objectives and plan for a year. But are the team internally able to use them? Do they know how to use them? And does it actually run? And it's a valuable part of how the company goes to market. Mark, I know you wanted to jump in here, but that's when we think about due diligence from a MarTech stack, these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about and working with organizations around.
Well, thanks, Kevin. That really does cover a lot of ground with the sort of new technology that you're working with, which is light speed ahead of what we had 10 years ago. And for me, from going back to my days as an analyst, I really want to see what your assumptions are. I want to understand. I mean, as an analyst, I used to go into a Canada pension plan, and I'd have my spreadsheet with 40, 50 different assumptions that went into my spreadsheet. And they said, well, I don't like 2% here or 5%. And I adjust it, and they said, oh, well, I'll adjust it and work. But for the people that show up with a TAT or a TAM or SAM and no further information whatsoever, uh, no, is it a bottom-up calculation? Let me see how many cities you're breaking into, how many people you're going to hire, et cetera, et cetera. Hire plus use the technology. That's a quantum leap to get those assumptions, and then we can put them into your MarTech. But I think people have to be thinking that they simply can't just use one number and then it just funnels up, goes into your funnel, and it comes down with all your programs going forward. So there are still a lot of people there that just think they can say the 1% of SAM or TAM and move on with the rest of the spreadsheet. So I think
Uh,
your some of your ideas later on we can talk about is how do you get people from A to B and to C.
Hmm.
Well, I agree. Just on that track, it's one thing today to understand from a VC lens, what is the tech stack today, and how are you thinking about that as it relates to your performance, your objectives, pushing into your target audience. But I think the other thing I would be interested to know, again, with that VC lens is what does your marketing roadmap look like? If based on market, the assumptions you brought up, if this is where you're at today, how do you see an infusion of capital supporting a deeper understanding of that? Is it about getting to deeper answers faster in terms of understanding if we start engaging at this stage of the sales cycle, the cycle itself can be a lot quicker and we can get to answer even faster, right? And I think the understanding of how we're driving in business today, how we acknowledge engagement with a TAM, and from there, how do we further infuse better, deeper marketing to theoretically speed up the sales process? All of that's going to be really important too. It's a huge part of that internal usage, the enablement, and the maturity of that process all in.
Yeah, and if I can add something there as well. We talked about the financials and the more tech budget goes into it. My plea to most entrepreneurs is stop just producing a year one, two, year and three, four, five budget. If you've been around for a year and a half, if you've been around 6 months, a year, whatever, use continuity. We want to see the financials in the past. How you spend our money in the past is some indication of how you can be a steward of our funds going forward. So that's something you have to really tell
Mm.
people. We spent this much, it worked, it doesn't. Year one forecast transitions from here to here. And it gives them a sense of whether they actually understand how to make a financial spreadsheet. Because if there's no one at the helm that knows financial modeling or anything, you want to dig deeper and said who's actually providing you guidance and stuff, and then who's providing you guidance in the Martech part. And obviously, you guys are experts in that side, so that's a bit of a plea that I make out to the founders.
Love it. Love it.
I like it. All right, all right. So let's take a look at some foundations here in a checklist. If we move into that, we were kind of talking about tech stacks and exactly what this means and maturity. And as Mark alluded to, there's, founders today have light years ahead technology that, we wish we would have had, 10 years ago, let's say, but at their fingertips. And potentially some of the stuff is somewhat free, even at the beginning of time. So, Kevin, let's get into just some foundational due diligence and what your definitions are for this.
Sure, we've got three of the five here on this slide, and we've of course got the next two on the following slide, just in the event anyone's questioning our math abilities here. But you're right, technology has never been better for marketers, and we've seen that over the last 10, 15 years in terms of the transition of IT spend as the biggest spend department in an organization into marketing, right? And like the growing swath of marketing tools at one's fingertips. So it's not enough or a differentiator in itself to just have the tools. It's really coming down to how we use them and the role they play in our growth. And if I pick on marketers for a moment, I feel like I can because I'm one and maybe guilty of this too in the past is you have to have a plan and a roadmap for what these tools are going to do and the adoption, bringing them in and using them internally. And I think marketers are definitely guilty of not having the kind of wherewithal to do that at times. We're moving so quick. We're just bringing in new tools because my CEO said he wants to do ABM and now we've got to do ABM. But I think we need better diligence on bringing things in. And that's going to really come through in these VC conversations with the likes of you, Chris, or Mark, in that we have a plan here and this is the role these tools play. Because again, when we're talking about a growth engine, we're talking about tools that are critical to us actually growing and driving on a sort of ROI or CAC basis
Hmm.
the value of those investments. Otherwise, they're just sitting there and it's shelfware and it's not adding value. So, number one on our pre-flight checklist is you've got to have a centralized CRM. This is, in my mind, the very foundation and pillar of all of your marketing. It's going to power everything that you do with whether it's prospects and customers and ongoing segmentation. It's a non-negotiable. It's the view into customer data and even your pipeline visibility. If we think back to the previous slide that we had, there's a classic marketing funnel, but you need to understand where you're at there. It can be HubSpot, it can be Salesforce, but you need to be able to show investors that you can track a pipeline, you can manage it, and know exactly where you're at in your marketing because of this. So this is ground zero as far as your MarTech stack, and it will feed everything up. This is your system of truth and where all data should live, be managed and stored. And then from there, that will push up into some of these other elements, including number two, which would be marketing automation. And this is really your, if the CRM is a system of record, your marketing automation platform is going to be your system of execution. It's going to distribute and pass all of the information out, whether it's through landing pages, through emails, and the ability to report on that level of engagement from those kinds of marketing actions. There's all kinds of process automation these tools offer, but on a really basic level, this is the tool by which you engage your target audience. It's going to help enable and create levels of repeatable functions that will enable your growth. It's going to help nurture and build your sales pipeline. And frankly, it's going to be the reason you can do a lot more on a nimble team. So that's really crucial as a number two step for having these things. And your I always say this to my clients too, is like your CRM and marketing automation, they've got to be tightly integrated. This is like chocolate plus peanut butter equals a whole lot better solution. They're good on their own, much better together. Number three would be foundational analytics. So you need legitimate 360-degree attribution for clarity of reporting. What's the value of your spend? Are you seeing ROI on it? If we're talking about getting to answers, are we clear that this isn't working and we can, to Mark's point, pivot and try other things? Part of this is getting an answer quickly and understanding what does and doesn't work. There's that old line. It's like 50% of my marketing works. I just don't know which 50% it is. So I think that's the key here is we're trying to get to that. And I think along with that, another step that gets missed is define processes for how we tag and track new campaigns. We need to actually attribute whether it's good to say, okay, well, these leads came from Google, but what keyword specifically was it? What ad
Mm.
group? And what variations from there, right? If we're running, I don't know, four or five different ad groups within Google, well, which one is it that's actually working? And how do we actually optimize around good spend versus bad spend? So getting answers, but then we got to optimize around that. Final two would be define lead flow and then a scalable CMS. So on the lead flow side, like some of this is documentation and process with respect to what do we do to drive a lead? What do we do when a lead comes in? How do we qualify it? How do we transition it into sales, a functional sales cycle, and then hopefully closure? Can we scale any degree of that, even if it's things like lead nurturing and scoring and understanding where they're at? And our marketing and sales actually aligned to know who does what and where. And I think some of that's process, some of that's communication, and some of it is just understanding where those transitions or handoffs really are at. And then finally, on the CMS side, there is no excuse anymore to not have an easy to update website. You cannot have this technical IT architecture where only IT can update the website. Like your website should be one of the most dynamic elements of your marketing program, whether it's landing pages or key CMS pages that just live inside of the WordPress or HubSpot or whatever Webflow, whatever else you're using. But you as a marketer need to be responsible. This is your number one domain that you're using to bring your audience to, and you need the ability to edit it quickly. And you should be editing it all the time. I can speak for Goose Digital's website. We just launched our new website 2 weeks ago. We've already changed it like three different times. And that's because we want to be dynamic. We want to be quick and responsive to what we're seeing in the space. And depending on what industry each of you are in, that might be even more critical to be able to do that. So you need the ability to quickly launch things, to quickly change things, and address whatever market changes are going on there.
Kevin, can I step back in just a second? There's some great words that you used earlier in that first slide there, something called non-negotiable. And I think it's really important from just to point out at this stage too, that when you're creating all this data for your marketing and you present it to the investors, it is non-negotiable. You can't be telling little white lies along the way. You can't be creating unattributable data. Because I have to remind you, and there's a piece of what I'll point out. There's a 16-page document on the AIO website called Things You Need to Know About Securities Regulations. But if you're a founder and making a pitch deck and you put information that is subsequently found to be incorrect, your investors can ask for your money back. The OSC can make you give back your money. So applying and sticking with securities regulation is non-negotiable. You don't get to pick and choose which part of it you abide by, or you can't say we're pre-revenue, we don't have to abide by securities regulation. So it's equally as important that you're telling the truth on that side, and that's something that a lot of founders don't realize, that they have to have some sense of the securities regulation. And if you're taking money and you're giving back a security, that's a security transaction, and you're on the hook for being truthful. So it just goes along with all this stuff that you're doing truthfully. You have to get the governance of the rest of your corporation consistent with that as well.
I love that call out like on more of a compliance or like regulatory level, Mark, because you're right. I look at it purely from a you've got to know everything inside and out from a data perspective. It's got to be black and white so that you can properly go to market knowing what you've learned and how it informs the future steps. But I think what you said is just as big a piece of the pie as anything that I'm saying. In fact, there, there's a larger magnitude to some degree of that. So I'm so glad that you called that out.
And also, I think we have to make sure that founders try to avoid AI whitewashing. In your first item, I think you talked about data and quality of data. There's a lot of people that still decide that they want to say we're an AI company versus saying we're a life science company doing this, utilizing AI. And once you talk to them for a minute or so, they have no clue if they have data or what the data would be needed. So that's one of my pet peeves, that people are somewhat realistic. You can't say you're a blockchain AI company and just expect everybody to invest in your company. You have to do everything you're talking about first, and then say we're going to have great data, which we're going to enhance our product with using AI. And I think we have another session later on that we can talk about AI and MarTech.
Yes.
Well, but to that point, and I know Chris, you want to jump in too. Like we said earlier, technology isn't the differentiator, and in fact, it's become table stakes in the sense that the barriers for entry in getting world-class technology on the marketing side, whether it's the likes of Clay or any of these other tools, they're incredible and they're super powerful. But the problem is, you should assume that every one of your competitors also has access to the same tools. So it's really going to come down to how are you using them and what you're going to do on a creative level to differentiate yourself. But that's a great call out. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, no, it's all good. I like to just say that all these five things are definitely needed. I would probably either add a sixth thing, or I would might even call this more of a in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of life. We were talking about this earlier this morning, and web presence. You need to have like a certain the DNA of the
Mm.
company established even prior to sort of executing at this level that we're talking about, which means again the basics of having a presence in X or LinkedIn or Instagram, potentially writing blogs on third-party websites, press releases, small videos, anything that will help build your SEO or even now your AI driven exposure into Chat GPT as an example. So all of these things need to be sort of in place in order to build upon that. And if you don't have this right, that stage right, which includes your website, as you're talking about, and then you can move to this next sort of level. So I think even potentially as a future webinar with Goose Digital, we could possibly hyper focus in on the origin story or the DNA. I always call it the primordial soup. When you pull yourself out of the swamp and you can define yourself as that fish or whatever you're doing when you're crawling out of the swamp and defining who you are as a category or a piece of software, what is that? You got to be able to tell that story in a good way on multiple platforms.
And I think, Chris, it's important that when you're answering those questions as a founder, that you're not defensive. I mean, your VCs and investors are asking questions because they need to know, and how you answer it is really important. If you're defensive and saying, well, it's not important, et cetera, that's not usually a good check mark to get. And as coming down to the coachable part, a lot of times I'm pretty quick at trying to talk to founders, and sometimes I'm harder on them asking those questions because I want to see how they react instead of when I take them to another investor. It's like a lawyer. You don't ask a question unless you know how they're going to answer it. And it's the same with how a founder's going to answer a question in front of a real investor.
Yes.
There's got to be a line, right, Mark, between conviction, but sort of like listening or coachability, like you're saying. Like, I
Yeah.
think you want someone who's got a vision, who's passionate about what they do, who believes in it. But I think to some point, though, they need to be able to sort of in intake feedback and sort of work that into things, particularly when you're working with specialized VCs who really know the space themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to get into some key takeaways here, and I think this could be a general recap from all three of us. But to begin, just from a frame of mind, most of our audience, I believe, today are Canadian-based startups and some agencies that are attending today. And just thinking, when we see deals at GAN or even market understanding, the US companies are typically spending, anywhere between 10 and 30% more at that given stage of those raises as they're moving forward versus Canadians. We typically do more R&D and engineering and IP development. So when we put it into that perspective, we have to put our thinking caps on and think a little bit differently. And again, one other thing too is, going direct versus, with software companies potentially developing a channel partnership relation. It now becomes more of a 3D chess game in terms of your marketing in your outreach and sort of, again, understanding how you as a young tech company are going to go to market is definitely going to be something where your investments in marketing and sales are going to have an effect. And trying to understand that pathway sooner than later is always good. And then one last thing too, I know that to put it all in perspective, all of these things in my mind, as I quote a VC, the godfather of VC that I used to do a lot of work with, he always used the word privilege. And so privilege comes with either defining trust, case studies, proven ROI, and being able to develop content like videos or press releases or blogs and white papers around defining that privilege of why you started this company and why it matters to this individual and why it matters now. And then, Kevin, your team then either can help create that or basically can help deliver or distribute that in a better way and a better mechanism. And then again, tracking all of that. So if you want to comment on, I think this leads into some of your points right here. If you want to comment on those last things.
Sure, and you're right on the American company comparison, Chris. Like, for listeners new to Goose Digital, about half of our business is US based and half of it's Canadian. And it doesn't matter the size of company, the maturity of the company, or even the industry. Across the board, American companies are always more aggressive as it relates to marketing and willingness to invest in marketing. And I think Canadian companies need to bear that in mind, particularly in these growth stages where a big portion of your total addressable is going to be US based or at least hit by US based competition. So I think that's a great call in itself. And I think sometimes as Canadians, we forget that, but Americans are highly aggressive and what I would define as pro marketing, much more so than Canadian. But as far as key takeaways from this session today, it really comes down to three. It's do not wait to start marketing until you've raised capital. Part of your pitch to raise capital should actually be the marketing engine you've already begun and where you plan on taking that with more money in your bank account to go and further build that fire. I think the message here is marketing and marketing spend is absolutely the foundation of your growth. It can't just be hiring a bunch of salespeople and giving them a phone and a Rolodex. On their own, they will not move anywhere near as quick as a proper marketing engine that's amplifying a differentiated perspective or point of view in their marketplace. And then finally, like when you're investing in growth and you're investing in marketing to go power that growth, you've got to be spending more money than more mature, stable organizations. We have ground to make up, and that's part of the reason we're raising capital is to get there faster. So I think from takeaways, those are my top three today from some of the things that we're talking about. Mark, I'd be curious from your perspective, is there anything
Sure.
missing, anything you wanted to add on that?
I have one element is it always comes down to valuation. You always have to look at the continuing evaluation from seed to Series A there. Is it a private market exit? How do you value a company? Is it going to be public market exit? Not so much these days. You've got to have a sense, and you have to have a sense of if we're going to spend $1 million. I want to know how long that's going to last and what milestones are you going to achieve. And with those milestones you achieve, is the stock going to suddenly be worth $1 instead of 50 cents? And am I going to be happy having other investors come in and dilute me at $1 per share on the road to growth? And everything has to tie into that. It's just a continuation or continuum of valuation. So as a founder, you have to be precise. We think we can achieve the following penetration, sales, etc., with your $1 million. The last thing an investor wants to do is to have the money run out. We're only three-quarters of the way to our milestone, and someone comes in and does a down round with you. So that's my last word is be realistic of how it is. Don't go in underfunded in your marketing budget. And of course, make sure your products can be finished as well.
That's an excellent call out, Mark. I'm glad you mentioned that. Finally, a bit of a plug from Goose Digital. We offer a suite of services to support with any of this. We do tons of execution in the form of starting it for the first time with you or adding to it if you've got a level of foundation already and you just want to extend the amount of marketing and the volume of which you're doing. We have all kinds of tech assessments, strategy services that help solidify your go to market, whatever that looks like, whatever you need, or even a starting point as to how to do that.
And I might just add, Kevin, is viewers can also look at the Angel Investors Ontario website. We have Knowledge Hub.
Yes.
We have reference to a Funded magazine and also XV magazine. There's stories of success stories and issues on Martech and everything else, soup to nuts. But clearly, Goose Digital, you have the expertise in this element, and I really appreciate the chance to have talked with you today on the subject as well.
Mark, it was a pleasure being on here with you and also Kevin and running through this. And again, we probably within the last 45 minutes only really scratched the surface of this conversation. I believe Kevin, you wanted, and Mark, you both wanted to potentially have a maybe a 3 or 4 part series to this where we can go a little bit deeper and or extend some topics. But what if I could add something this as a takeaway to leave here today? Again, AI is a huge topic. We didn't really get too deep into it, and AI agentic workflow is probably going to be part of Kevin your Goose digital stack. I do want to have
Oh,
a
yeah.
future webinar, maybe around again looking at 10 steps to a sales process, and then arguing with you on where marketing owns it and where sales starts to take over,
Ooh.
and also where agentic AI might come into play, where we can start to sort of streamline things a bit more efficiently for maybe not having 10 BDRs, but maybe you only need 4 BDRs to do something, and then therefore there's an establishment of higher quality leads using agentic AI, and maybe we can get into that. But if I can leave the audience with something, think of AI right now as not something that needs to be a giant or a 100-meter race. Think of this as a marathon. Think of one small thing that you could do in your sales tactics or MarTech stack today per month, like one little tiny thing, and see if you can automate that. And then next month, maybe try some other little tiny little thing. And after a year, you have 12 tiny things that add up to potentially cost savings. And again, I'm certain that Goose and other agencies are going to be applying these types of things in your monthly sort of programs that you'd be offering your clients. But maybe we can discuss some of these subjects and go into some examples on future webinars together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we said our three groups, we were interested in doing a 4 part series, of which this is the first. And going into the new year, we certainly wanted to cover three more. And I think AI will certainly be part of that mix. So without question, and maybe there's roles it can play in concert with a sales and marketing team and where the stages are. So that sounds like a great foundation for perhaps part two coming soon.
Perfect.
And I want to thank everybody in the whole ecosystem, Angel and Goose Digital ecosystem for watching today. And obviously, we're always welcome to get comments and suggestions for some of those events in the future.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. And we're going to be ending the webinar, and we'll send out information again on the future webinars very shortly. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.